Welcome to Money Talks. I'm Genevieve Westcott with your latest financial news from across New Zealand and around the world. In this edition, the New Zealand dollar drops after our credit rating downgrade on Friday, but the three big credit rating agencies can't agree on whether we're now AA or AAA. What's the fallout? With the world worried about European and U.S. growth, can Kiwis still expect to buck the global trend and trend above global growth this year and next? Joining me today is Nevil Gibson, Editor-in-Chief of the National Business Review, and Jeff Matthews, Senior Financial Advisor for Spicers. So let's kick off with that big credit rating downgrade. No surprises there, Jeff.
No, Genevieve. I mean, Standard & Poor's came out with a warning 2 years ago, mid-2009. So it was no surprise given, we have issues, but then Christchurch on top of that just meant the ratings agency. And I guess the last time Standard & Poor's actually changed our ratings was actually November 1996. So, we're talking the best part of 15 years ago since we had a change to our credit rating. But not a surprise. And again, it's just a bit of a wake-up call for the government and for the country at large. I mean, we've seen what's happened with Greece and Ireland, and we don't want to be in the same spot. So you need to start taking evasive action early.
Okay, so here's a question, Neville. What are we, AA or AAA, or does it really matter?
Well, the reaction to a downgrade has been surprisingly complacent, I think.
Very calm.
Remember the fuss a few weeks ago when they downgraded the United States. Japan was also downgraded. So we're quite good company, I suppose, if you're heavily indebted and you're going to take longer to pay it back because we enjoy the standard of living we want to enjoy for a little bit longer.
I think the Dan Carter story was a bigger story than the downgrade.
Oh, do you? Yeah. Well, that is kind of devastating, isn't it?
Too, I guess.
Yeah, it was. On the field,
Mm.
field. So listen, now our own Alan Bollard, of course, is being pretty tough in warning us that there's going to be a very long, slow haul back to better times. What are you picking about his comments, Neville?
Well, he gave some quite downbeat comments. I think he's really just warning us, as Jeff says. It's a bit of a wake-up call because I think we've been floating along on expectations, and certainly Bill English has also been making similar warnings. But the way it gets reported in the media, I think, doesn't give the sort of underlying message that we are still heavily indebted. But the worst thing about it is it's going to take a long, long time to recover. And the Standard & Poor's and Fitch ratings, what they're saying in their comments is that we don't want to fall back into our bad habits of a few years ago, and they really want to see us building up our savings over the next 3 to 4 years.
And let's face it, our foreign debt is now, 70% of GDP. That's high, Jeff.
Well, yes and no. I mean, when you look at some of the ones in Europe, they're well over 100. I think Greece is heading to 150%. So, I mean, there are places much worse than us. That doesn't mean we can be complacent. Part of trying to improve our savings is actually coming out with a structured approach. And I guess one of those things is, do you make KiwiSaver compulsory? You can talk. I mean, what the government has to do is walk the talk. You can keep talking about, yes, we need savings, but if you don't have policies that help implement that, then it's just talk, basically.
Yeah, but we got an election coming up,
Oh,
and
I know.
it's unlikely that they're going to make the tough call, correct, Neville?
Part of the problem all around the world is that politicians don't want to be unpopular and get voted out.
That's right, not on their patch.
The markets are telling them they've got to do things, and in New Zealand, the things that we've got to do is look at national super, look at the student loans, that sort of thing. And John Key's position is, no, we won't go there at the moment.
Yeah, and here's the question. Is John Key really just sleepwalking his way to victory?
Well, he's certainly walking to victory. I don't know if he's sleepwalking, but he might get a wake-up call as well. But the population and the polls show that they don't want to know about this.
Yeah, and certainly you raised the retirement age issue. I mean, his own government experts have told him, look, you've got to take charge of this. And apparently what he said in the House yesterday was, we're okay until 2025. Okay for us, perhaps. What about the next generation?
Well, if I was the Retirement Commission, I'd be pulling my hair out because, they've done research and basically they just ignore it. One of the simplest ways, when I'm dealing with an individual client, one of the simplest ways to fix a shortfall in savings is if they work for another 2 years, that delays having to draw money for 2 years, you basically get a 4-year advantage and suddenly the numbers look, doable. Every other country, I think in Germany now it's 67 or 68, every other country is raising the retirement age. People are living longer and healthier, so why are we stuck with this kind of mental block on 65?
Okay, let's talk a little bit more about the credit agency rating downgrade. One of the big problems, apparently, why they did it was because we have high agricultural debt. Your response?
Well, it's really high private debt, and a lot of it's been borrowed for both housing and agriculture, and our prices of our property is high. But of course the government rather likes that, and one of the things that Bill English has been saying is we don't want to be demolishing people's real savings, which is in their houses and in their properties. So again, he's caught in a bit of a nexus there.
Of course, we're all waiting for the rebuild to begin in Christchurch. How far away are we going to begin to see, do you think, the economy pick up somewhat, Jeff?
At some point next year, I think you're going to start to see, I mean, even if the houses don't get started until June or September, people are going to have to start buying in supplies in anticipation. So,
Well, Fitch commented that, of course, this is going to blow out our current account deficit next year, possibly as high as 5%. And certainly most of the other analysts would agree with that. So, because to do this kind of rebuild, we do have to import a lot more goods. So while it's going to provide jobs, that sort of thing, it's also going to mean greater imports.
One of the rare bright spots I thought in the news lately was Hansel's is now targeting Canada to grow, and this is a company that's doing phenomenally well. Tell me more.
Well, I was very pleased because I think Canada and New Zealand have a very good fit together, yet there don't seem to be any meeting of the minds there. And so I was talking to the people at Hansel's and discovered that they found that the market there is very similar to the one in Australia and in the UK. And they said it's much easier to go into Canada with their products, which are mainly baked goods, that sort of thing, rather than try Asia, where tastes are quite different.
Yeah, it's interesting. They're not even going to attempt Asia. They got to be one of the few companies in the country that isn't targeting.
Well, their main export is English-style puddings and flavoured foods and essences and that sort of thing. They're doing really well.
I think the Canadians are going to absolutely love it. On a scale of 1 to 10, Jeff, how do you think the New Zealand economy is tracking at the moment?
About a 6. I mean, we're in a much better spot than most other places. I mean, Australia's still going gangbusters with exports of raw materials to China and India. China's growth rate is still running at 9%, so it's not, it's slowing from 10.5. What a problem to have. So, the fact is that we're close. We benefit from Australia doing well, and say China's become one of our main trading partners. So in that sense, we're in a much better spot than if you were sitting in Portugal, for example. Nevil,
I see that one of the iconic vineyards here in New Zealand has just been snapped up. Can you tell me about that?
Well, this is Tikaranga, but there's a whole consolidation going on, and vineyards are actually selling quite well.
They've
at very
started
low
to,
prices. And people like Yearlands and these kind of companies are buying up surrounding vineyards because people have over-invested in them. And unless you've got critical mass and you're a really multinational company, you don't really stand much of a chance. And this one is owned by Bill Foley. He's got a big operation in California, also in Australia. So what you're going to see is this is an overseas owned industry. Virtually every major company is an international one. And people don't think about that, but they'll just keep buying up.
Coming up after the break, global shares plunge as Greece announces over the weekend it will miss its deficit targets this year. Americans take to the streets with anti-Wall Street protests to tell banks we're mad as hell and we're not going to take it anymore. And the Aussies claim Chinese produce is being smuggled illegally into Australia via New Zealand. So don't go away. Here's your Farmers Facts and Figures quiz. Tower insurance premiums are set to rise because the company has to now pay more for its reinsurance coverage because of the Canterbury quake. Question, how much more will your premiums increase on average? The answer when we return. Stay tuned. Welcome back to Money Talks. Just before the break, we asked you, how much will your tower insurance premiums increase on average? You can expect to pay 20 to 30% more for your house contents and motor policies. It seems Christchurch and Wellington will carry a higher risk than Auckland. Meantime, Tower still expects to make a profit of up to $28 million in the year to September. Now, we were talking about wine, and of course, Jeff, as we know, has just come back from Sweden. What did you notice about our wine over there?
Well, it was available in a number of restaurants, but what disturbed me, I went to quite a nice restaurant, and clearly they'd basically taken a Maori name, or what they thought was a Maori name. It was, instead of being Waipuna Springs, there was no I, so it was kind of Wapuna Springs, which immediately I looked at it and I asked to see the bottle, and it's being marketed as a kind of Marlborough Sauvignon Blanc, but it's really a blend. So obviously, the Swedish state liquor store, whoever it is who's the importer, is buying bulk wine and blending it. And if you ended up thinking you were getting a bottle of Marlborough Sauvignon Blanc and you end up with a blend, I mean, maybe you end up like Fonterra with problems with people, you know, taking your product and adding things to it, and you lose control of it.
Neville, you know a lot about the wine industry. What are the implications when you hear about things like this happening?
Well, it's certainly been happening, and mainly in the British supermarkets where there's a lot of house wines. And but Sauvignon Blanc is the main wine that people want from New Zealand. We can't produce enough of it, but of course it's can be quite a strong and powerful wine, and they blend it with these sweeter ones, and that's really to meet local customers' needs. Sounds like sacrilege to us, but it certainly means big sales.
Yeah.
And a lot of this wine isn't sold very cheap either.
Yeah.
It's still quite premium prices for anything with New Zealand on it, and England still tends to get a bit of a premium over some of the other countries.
While we're over in Europe, gentlemen, let's talk now globally, big picture, about what's happening in Greece. They voted over the weekend now to have some more austerity cuts, if you like. The Greek people don't like it, but they've got their back to the wall.
They certainly are, and they've also missed some of the targets, so the pressure is really on the politicians in Greece to deliver, but how can they when the population are more or less up, not quite up in arms, but they're certainly pretty angry, and behind them, German and French politicians trying to put the heat on the Greek government. It's not going to be an easy one to sort out, but I guess they'll muddle their way through, and extra money will come from the EU in some form or other.
Yeah, Germans are, as you say, increasingly unhappy with this, but it seems to me that the entire world now is trapped in this leaky boat, if you like. None of us can get off, and we know it's having great implications over in the U.S. I mean, they have their own problems, Jeff.
They have their own problems. They don't really need the European problem on top of it. I mean, Greece is only 2% of the European economy. I mean, it's a nothing economy in the scheme of things, but because the politicians got behind, they didn't get ahead of the issue back in April last year, and 18 months later, they come up with a band-aid, and then the problems got worse, and then they try to fix it, and it gets worse. The markets are saying, you know, Greece has got too much debt. You can fiddle around with the bond yields and extending the loans, but basically they're insolvent. And so they're trying to solve one problem when the issue is they're just carrying too much debt. And the other problem is why are they missing their targets is because instead of getting any economic growth, I think the economy is due to contract about 5.5% this year. So tax revenue's down. You know, you've got issues. You can't grow your way out just by austerity measures. You actually have to grow the economy.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
I mean, the US isn't exactly the same boat. It's trundling along at kind of 1% growth where it really needs to be at 2 or 3. And where do you get the growth from?
Yeah, and that's the question. Neville, where do you think the growth is going to come from? Certainly in the question of the US.
Well, the problem there is with the huge debt and the need to raise taxes, that's a bit of an impost on the private sector. But as Jeff said earlier, the corporate scene in America, they've got so much money they don't know what to do with it. There's huge savings are building up. But the problem is there's no real return on it. Even some of the major companies like Warren Buffett, he's doing a share buyback, which is not really a good thing for investors because it tells you that they haven't got anywhere else to invest their money and make returns.
Yeah, but meantime, while they sit on these piles of money, 14 million Americans are out of work. That's phenomenal.
Yep, I mean, it's no easy fix. In some cases, you know, people are in the wrong location for the jobs. I saw an article, I can't remember which paper it was, but there was something like 2 million jobs that people, you know, that were available, but people didn't have the skill set to do them. So part of it is apprenticeships and people coming out of the school system with inadequate, you know, work skills.
And of course, President Obama now, he's got to own this problem. He's been in office for 2.5 years. Is he likely to fix it? Neville?
Well, he's got a job scheme going, but the economists analysed this thing because this is a huge issue, even in New Zealand. Can governments create jobs? Have people got the right skills? Is there enough mobility in the labour market? What is the role of minimum wages? Does that actually prevent people being employed? Should we have a youth wage again in New Zealand so that employers can take people on at very low risk? These are big issues, and the economists haven't got any easy answers. Meanwhile, there's all this money waiting to be invested, and people, of course, who need jobs.
Yeah, and they need jobs desperately. I've been watching with some fascination what's been happening with the anti-Wall Street protests. People rising up in the streets saying, we're mad as hell and we ain't going to take it anymore.
But I mean, what are we talking, like 1,500 people out in a city of 12 million? I mean, it gets...
You don't think it's going to gain momentum?
It's like John Minto. He stands down the bottom of Queen Street with 10 other people and he's going to get media coverage. I mean, it's kind of I understand the issue, but it's got much more publicity than it really deserves.
Yeah, but look at what happened in Britain with the unemployed youth, the rioting. Look at what's happened in Greece. Could we be seeing the same thing in America? Early stages.
In Britain, 2/3 of those people were actually known criminals, so it was more criminal rather than unemployed people. They were known criminals, and so they took advantage of an opportunity. But yeah, I mean, that's a worrying concern that things could flash just that quickly. And I mean, the real problem, you look at a place like Spain where you've got the kind of under 25, 50% of the population is unemployed. I mean, if they sit like that for 3 or 4 years, what are the social implications? I mean, apart from having children living at home until they're 30 plus, they have no work skills. They've got too much time on their hands. It's a potential problem.
And here's a question with somebody like Obama now up for re-election. Is he going to just be a kind of a Jimmy Carter figure, a lame one-term president that really wasn't able to come to grips with any of this? Neville?
Well, possibly, but of course Jimmy Carter's reputation is now being, dollied up. I don't know how this happens because, but certainly politicians have got to learn that sometimes they've got to make hard decisions, but you've got to package them up and make them popular. And I think one of the problems they have in America and others is to tell people that the welfare state really is unsustainable. You've got to get that message out there, but you've also got to have the, as well as the stick, you've got to have the carrot. I think you've really got to loosen up some of the, America in business is hugely full of red tape and so on. It makes New Zealand look like a wonderland for doing business, and they haven't tackled any of these because behind them is a lot of vested interests who benefit from all this, including a whole lot of federal money.
Yeah, and I think with Obama too, earlier in the year, he his big thing was making every American get health insurance. Was that a mistake?
The biggest issue at the moment is lack of jobs and lack of growth. I mean, I understand
jobs.
It's all about the economy. The healthcare thing, I understand. I mean, the US spends more per capita on healthcare than anybody else, and 25% of the population have no coverage. I mean, in a first world country, that's appalling.
Let's bring it on back to our part of the world now. Across the ditch, what are those Aussies up to, accusing our vegetables of doing naughty things?
Oh, there's terrible TV people. They love food scares. We've got the Greens here in Australia, we've got the same sort of thing where they think any kind of chemical with a long, complicated name, if it's found in a vegetable, it's going to poison you, which is not the case. But anyway, this TV program took a whole lot of veggies from New Zealand and analysed them, found traces of this, that and the other, all of which are under the safe to eat sort of system. But they found that some of those veggies came from China into an Asian mix. And so they went ballistic. But there's nothing unsafe about this, but it makes a good story. It
does make a good story, and it just goes to show that closer economic relations, CER, is a very long way away, isn't it?
Well, Australia is pretty good. I called it an Under Armour because food exports from New Zealand are as safe as you can get. And there's no problem with our apples, as we well know. But in Australia, they've got huge lobbies against this sort of thing, and they will keep fighting on whatever front they can find.
Thanks, Neville. Coming up after the break, Future Proof on the highways and byways of the economic world as our experts take us along for the ride and point out what's coming up. ANZ is the first Australian bank to test offshore funding markets since they went into a tailspin in early August. A question for you now in our Farmers Facts and Figures quiz. How much has ANZ raised in a bond issue in the U.S. for a term of 5 years? Find out after the break. Stay with us. Welcome back to Money Talks. Just before the break, we asked you, how much has ANZ raised in a bond issue in the U.S. for a term of 5 years? Almost $400 million. Jeff, now, what's up for you in the next week? What are you going to be looking for?
Some stability on what's happening in Europe. I mean, some clear decisions and some timelines as to when things are going to be done would be helpful. If you're looking at investment markets, really the US starts from about the 15th or the 20th of this month. We start getting third quarter profit announcements, so we'll get a better handle on how the economy is doing. We saw the manufacturing index numbers were better in September, car sales were up in September, consumer confidence is slightly better than it was earlier in the year. So behind that, and we said there's an avalanche of cash both at the private level and the company level. So all it takes is a bit of good news and we may end up with a much better December quarter from investment markets.
Yeah, the stock markets around the world, Neville, have taken a hell of a hammering this past week or so. What are you picking moving forward?
Well, when you have three big heavy losses on Wall Street, you can just about guarantee that the next day they're going to go back up again. Maybe not as high because we're now below the lowest for the year, so it's really in the pits at the moment. Talk of a bear market, you know, who knows. But there was always a bounce back in the final quarter, particularly in America. It's called the Santa Claus effect.
The Santa Claus effect.
So buy stocks before Christmas.
Okay.
You never know what's in their bag.
And Christmas is coming.
Yes.
Now, you went to an interesting breakfast the other morning about Russia and New Zealand agri-tech products. Tell me about that.
We've got a big month coming up as a result of the Rugby World Cup. We've got the Food Awards, Food Innovation Show, and now we've had speakers over in China just last week and in Russia. And what's going on is that Russia has not invested in its agricultural sector for a couple of decades. China needs technology as well. And there's a huge space there where New Zealand, with good trade relations with both these countries, free trade with China already, potential one with Russia. And I think it's really not a matter of sending goods there, but getting our expertise in there. And, you know, they've got the capital in Russia, but got no expertise. It's all pasture-based farming, huge potential. And I think that's the kind of area. And certainly the audience, when they heard the figures, Russia has a fifth of the world's water. So there's no problems there. It's almost got as much agricultural potential as Brazil. In fact, it's probably got more if they can get their act together. And we could be in there on the ground floor.
Yeah, that's
as the first
massive.
Western country to become deeply involved in their agricultural thing. And we don't have to worry about tariff barriers or all that kind of stuff. Russia wants to be a food exporter, not an importer. So imports, so there's a restricted export market there because eventually they'll get rid of it.
Talking about the Rugby World Cup, I see that we're going to have to pump out more money now going into this. Does it worry you?
No.
Why not?
Look, you know, you're putting on a big party and you're going to quibble about, you know, ordering in some more chips and a few more beers at the end. I mean, get over it.
What's a few more million? Doesn't bother you one bit. Is it worth it? Is it worth the investment? I mean, when you think about things like, you know, the Russians being here, looking at what's going on?
A lot of that coverage, I've got friends in Aspen, they are watching the All Black France game the other day, you know, love the haka, they've been here before. You just get a huge amount of coverage, you know, both in Scandinavia and North America, and it's hard to buy that kind of coverage. And the feedback from most of the media has been, you know, the New Zealand public has got behind the World Cup and it's made it a great success.
Yeah. What's it going to cost us all up?
Oh, well, I don't know about the figure, but $1 billion could be involved in the overall spend. Sure, most of that would have been spent, but it's being focused. People have been saving up for this. Sold out the sevens the other day.
Yeah,
that's
I know.
not cheap.
Unbelievable.
So people love these sort of parties, but yeah, so it's good in that sense.
So good for morale for the country, but also good for foreign business as well.
Oh, definitely. You wouldn't get the Wall Street Journal writing an article about New Zealand wines unless they tied it into rugby, and that's been happening in a lot of world media where the focus is on New Zealand. So say, well, there's one, they went on a search in New York for a New Zealand restaurant. They found one.
Wow, okay.
You see?
Yeah.
And so this became a big story in New York.
Well, one of the Swedish companies that's invested quite heavily in Russia is a company called Black Earth. It's listed on the Stockholm Exchange, and they bought up land in the kind of Ukraine and parts of Russia. They're a huge corporate farmer. But I think we talked about it a year or so ago, but they're still going gangbusters. I mean, they've been able to buy up a lot of these commune-type farms, and the scale of farming, there's so much land in places like Russia and the Ukraine. Like you say, you could be a net exporter.
A New Zealand company just near Vladivostok, we saw a video of it. They've got grain fields where you can't see the horizon for wheat.
Yep, it's just like being in Washington State. You know, you look from one end,
miles and miles
and miles of wheat as far as you can see, on a scale that you can't imagine here. And even driving through the eastern part of Germany and into Poland, I mean, it's a huge farm. You don't realise it's just farmland, farmland, farmland. And I say when you get to Russia, it's serious farmland.
Well, lots of opportunities in the world, gentlemen. So thank you for sharing your insights once again. Thanks to my guest, Senior Financial Advisor for Spicers, Jeff Matthews, and NBR Editor-in-Chief, Nevil Gibson. Be sure to check out our website. Meantime, remember these wise words: if you're not the lead dog, the view never changes. Check it out. Keep the faith. See you next time.